Madarame's Palace is the worst palace in Persona 5 Royal. Most of the palaces in this game are pretty good overall and provide a solid amount of fun, and even Okumura's palace, which you guys voted as the worst palace by country mile in a recent poll, has some redeeming qualities that keep it from being the worst in the game. The same cannot be said for Madarame's Palace. The first issue with it is the lack of stylistic appeal caused by the combination of an unmemorable aesthetic and extremely unmemorable music. I can't even say the music was super bad because it doesn't even exist in my memory, that's how bland it is. Granted, Madarame's isn't the only palace to have mediocre music, but it's hard to defend this soundtrack when you compare it to that of Kaneshiro, Sai, Shido, or Maruki's palace, which all sound great. Next, let's talk about the enemies real quick. They're not awful or anything. In fact, the Shikiaoji savage enemy and the Will Seed mini-boss are pretty challenging, but every other enemy in the palace is just kinda eh. The main issue that sticks out to me is the fact that they don't really feel like they fit the palace that well. I know that not every enemy has to be super fitting for the palace they're in, but just thinking about enemies like the Archangel mini-boss in Kamoshida's palace, and a good amount of the enemies in Futaba's palace like Anubis, it's hard to think of a similarly fitting enemy in Madarame's palace. I'd also like to briefly bring up the puzzle where you jump through paintings to progress through the palace. Using paintings is obviously fitting for the palace and its ruler, but my issue with it is that it doesn't really require intelligence, but instead relies on trial and error. From what I could tell, there isn't any rhyme or reason why X painting leads to Y painting, if that makes sense. So how quickly you finish the puzzle is completely dependent on luck, which just feels wrong for a puzzle. And while we're on the topic of puzzles, the portal puzzle with the Sayuri paintings is cool when it comes to figuring out which is the real painting. It serves the purpose of testing your memory without really being dumb or unfair, but apart from the paintings themselves, all this area does to convey vanity is color everything gold. And yes, I couldn't think of a better way to go about it, so maybe it's somewhat hypocritical to say this, but I can't shake the feeling that making everything one color is a pretty weak way to reflect a palace ruler's theme. I think a better way to do this, apart from incorporating it into puzzles like the Sayuri one, is to have small details here and there that reflect said theme. Take Shido and Maruki's palaces for instance. Shido's has the guests wearing masks to show how he believes no one shows their true face to others, and Maruki's has a bunch of cognitive people exclaiming how happy they are, and even cognitive people floating in the final area of the palace to symbolize their ascension to a heavenly world. An entire area being colored gold in Madarame's palace reaches nowhere near this level of intrigue or complexity, and there isn't really anything I can think of in his palace that produces a similar positive feeling. And if you want to see the worst boss in Persona 5 Royal, watch this video too.